In this episode, we're going to take a clear-eyed look at what it really means to secure serial protocols and operational technology, because beginners often assume that if something is old or runs over a simple cable, it must be either harmless or naturally protected. The reality is that serial protocols still move important measurements and commands, and those measurements and commands can affect physical processes just as surely as anything on a modern network. When you hear names like Modbus RTU, Profibus, Data Highway Plus, and DNP3, you are hearing the language that many devices still use to coordinate work in factories, utilities, and infrastructure. These protocols were designed for reliability and simplicity in environments where devices were assumed to be trusted and physical access was assumed to be controlled. That design history matters because it explains why many of these protocols do not include modern security features by default. Your goal here is not to memorize packet formats, but to understand what these protocols do, where they show up, why they are difficult to secure in the same way as office networking, and how to think about risk when the main protections are physical, procedural, and architectural. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful starting point is to understand what serial protocols typically provide and what they typically do not provide. They provide a shared language so devices can exchange values like readings, status bits, and control commands, often using a master and remote pattern where one device asks and another device answers. They provide predictable behavior, relatively small message sizes, and compatibility across long equipment life cycles, which is why they persist. What they often do not provide is strong authentication, meaning they may not reliably prove that a message came from an authorized device. They also often do not provide encryption, meaning messages can sometimes be observed if someone can tap into the line. They may not provide integrity checks that resist intentional tampering, even if they have basic error detection for noise. In practice, that means the primary trust boundary is not a password inside the protocol, but the assumption that only the right devices are connected to the wires. Beginners should notice that this changes the security game. Instead of relying on deep protocol protections, you rely on controlling who can access the medium, how devices are added, and how changes are approved and monitored. Modbus Remote Terminal Unit, RTU, is a good example of this design philosophy because it is widely used, straightforward, and often deployed in environments where simplicity and interoperability were the top goals. In Modbus RTU, communication commonly follows a request and response pattern where a master device polls remote devices, and those devices respond with requested data or accept commands. The protocol often uses addressing so multiple devices can share a line, and it uses function codes to indicate what kind of action is being requested, such as reading values or writing values. For beginners, the key point is that Modbus RTU was not built with the idea of hostile actors on the wire, so it does not naturally challenge a device to prove identity the way modern secure protocols do. That means if an unauthorized device can connect to the bus, it may be able to talk in the same language and be treated as legitimate. It also means that if messages can be observed, an attacker may learn how the system behaves without needing to break encryption. Understanding this helps you see why physical access control and strict procedures for connecting devices are so central in serial environments. Another reality of Modbus RTU is that it is often used to carry both harmless-looking reads and high-impact writes, and that difference matters when you think about risk. Reading values can reveal process conditions and system structure, which can be sensitive, but writing values can change the process directly, like commanding an output or changing a setting. Beginners sometimes assume that if a system is working, it must be safe, but a protocol can be functioning perfectly while still being vulnerable to unauthorized commands. This is especially important because many OT failures and many OT attacks are fundamentally about changing what a controller believes or what an actuator does. If a Modbus RTU device accepts writes without strong checks, then the main barrier is whether an unauthorized party can get onto the line or get a trusted device to send the wrong command. That makes segmentation and controlled gateways important because you want to limit who can originate commands and where those commands can travel. It also makes auditing important because you want to be able to detect unusual write activity, even if the protocol itself does not provide strong identity. In exam-style reasoning, if you see Modbus RTU in a scenario, you should immediately think about trust assumptions and the need to compensate for them. Profibus represents another common industrial communication family, and while the details can be complex, the beginner takeaway is that it is designed for industrial automation where predictable, reliable device coordination matters. Profibus networks are often used to connect controllers to distributed devices, such as sensors, actuators, and remote input and output modules, and the communication behavior is typically structured to support timely updates and stable operations. Like many industrial protocols, Profibus was designed in an era where the primary threats were noise, interference, and device failure, not attackers attempting to impersonate devices. That history affects security because it means the protocol's core strengths are availability and determinism, not cryptographic protections. For a beginner, it is enough to recognize that Profibus often sits close to the process, which means that disruption can affect real-world behavior quickly. It also means that changes are often tightly controlled by operations teams because even small communication issues can produce alarms, downtime, or unsafe states. Security planning, therefore, leans heavily on controlling access to the network, controlling how devices are added or replaced, and maintaining strict documentation. When you understand Profibus as a process-adjacent network, you naturally understand why physical protection and discipline maintenance are part of security, not separate from it. A particularly important concept with protocols like Profibus is that reliability features can be confused with security features, and beginners should learn not to mix those up. Reliability features help devices detect corrupted messages caused by noise, or help maintain stable timing so the control loop stays predictable. Security features help devices determine whether a message is authorized and whether it has been tampered with intentionally by an adversary. A protocol can be excellent at reliability and still weak at security, because the protocol may be good at detecting random errors, but not designed to resist a deliberate attacker who understands the message structure. This distinction matters in OT because environments are often electrically noisy, so reliability features are essential, but they do not protect against someone with access and intent. When you see a protocol praised as robust, ask yourself what kind of robustness is being discussed. If it is robustness against interference, that does not automatically mean robustness against impersonation. Many exam questions are built around this distinction, testing whether you understand that physical and procedural controls are needed when protocol-level protections are limited. A calm, accurate mindset is to treat reliability as necessary but not sufficient for security. That mindset helps you avoid overconfidence when evaluating legacy protocol environments. Data Highway Plus is another example you may encounter in legacy OT environments. And the most important beginner lesson is not the specific electrical details, but the operational reality around older industrial networks. Data Highway Plus often appears in environments where equipment has been running for a long time, where upgrades are costly, and where compatibility with existing controllers and interfaces matters. In such environments, the network is often stable and well understood by the people who maintain it, and that stability can create a sense of safety that is not always deserved. Older networks often assume that the right devices are the only devices present, and they rely on physical layout and controlled access as the core security boundary. This can work well when access is truly controlled, but it becomes risky when environments change, such as when contractors need access, when remote support is introduced, or when a bridge is added to share data with newer systems. Beginners should recognize that the most dangerous moment is often not day-to-day operation, but change and integration, because that is when new pathways are created. Data Highway Plus highlights the broader security lesson that legacy is not just a technology label. It is an environment where the security model often lives outside the protocol itself. Understanding that helps you reason about why controls like locked cabinets, strict work procedures, and carefully managed gateways are central. DNP3 is commonly associated with utility and infrastructure environments where remote monitoring and control across distance is important, and it provides a good contrast because its design goals include operating over less predictable communications. Distributed Network Protocol 3, DNP3, is often used in environments where devices are geographically spread out and where communication links may be intermittent or constrained. In those settings, the protocol needs to support meaningful reporting of events and values, and it needs to handle situations where a remote device may need to store information and send it when communication is available. For beginners, the key idea is that DNP3 is often part of supervisory environments that link central monitoring to remote field devices, which means the trust boundary can stretch across longer distances and more varied physical locations. That creates different risks than a short, local serial link inside one cabinet, because remote sites may have weaker physical security and communications may pass through intermediate infrastructure. DNP3, like the other protocols in this lesson, has a history that includes trust assumptions, but it also exists in contexts where modern security considerations have become increasingly important. The exam-relevant mindset is to recognize where DNP3 is typically used and why its operational setting influences security strategy. When you talk about securing DNP3 in the real world, you have to think about two categories of risk that beginners often overlook: message authenticity and operational consequence. If a remote command is accepted as legitimate when it is not, the impact can be serious because remote operations can change flows, switch states, or protective behaviors. If remote telemetry is spoofed or delayed, the control center may make decisions based on false information, which can be just as dangerous as a wrong command. Even if you do not go deep into specific mechanisms, you should recognize that remote systems often need stronger assurance about what is real, because the physical distance makes verification harder. This is why in many OT settings, security is built as a layered approach that includes physical security at remote sites, strict control of communication paths, careful monitoring for anomalies, and clear procedures for when remote actions are allowed. Beginners sometimes imagine that secure protocol is the whole answer, but in OT, a secure protocol is only one layer, and the environment must still manage keys, devices, and change processes responsibly. The practical lesson is that security depends on how the protocol is deployed, not just on what the protocol name is. That helps you think clearly when questions describe remote operations and ask you to choose the safest approach. Across all four protocols, one of the hardest realities is that you cannot retrofit perfect security into a system that was designed around trust without affecting operations. So the goal becomes smart risk reduction rather than instant transformation. If you try to add heavy monitoring, you might consume limited bandwidth or introduce timing delays that disrupt communication on shared serial lines. If you try to isolate too aggressively, you might cut off visibility operators rely on to keep processes safe. If you try to upgrade everything at once, you might create downtime or compatibility problems that the environment cannot tolerate. This is why OT security emphasizes planning and staged improvement, often starting with controlling access pathways and reducing unnecessary connections. In serial environments, the most meaningful improvements often come from controlling physical access, standardizing procedures for connecting devices, using dedicated managed workstations for maintenance, and documenting every change. It also comes from clear responsibility boundaries, because someone must own the decision rights for connecting a device to a bus and for approving modifications. Beginners should understand that a system can be operationally stable and still be security fragile if its trust assumptions are no longer valid. The point of learning these protocols is to recognize those assumptions quickly and respond with appropriate compensating controls. Another shared reality is that visibility is often limited, and limited visibility changes how detection and response work. In modern Ethernet networks, it is relatively common to collect centralized logs and observe traffic patterns, but on serial links you may have fewer places to observe and fewer built-in records. That does not mean you cannot detect problems, but it often means detection relies on operational symptoms like unexpected device behavior, missed updates, unusual alarms, or changes in process trends. It also means that when you do observe traffic, it may require deliberate instrumentation and physical access, which is not always available on short notice. This is why baseline understanding is so important in OT. You need to know what normal looks like so that abnormal stands out. For Modbus RTU, abnormal might look like unexpected write activity or unusual polling patterns. For Profibus, abnormal might look like device dropouts, timing issues, or repeated retries that suggest interference or tampering. For Data Highway Plus, abnormal might appear during integration changes or unexpected device presence. For DNP3, abnormal might include unexpected remote commands or telemetry that does not match physical reality. The exam often rewards the mindset that ties technical signals to operational consequences rather than relying on perfect visibility. A core beginner misunderstanding is assuming that because these protocols are common, they must be standardized in the same way as office networking, where devices negotiate and authenticate as a matter of routine. In many OT deployments, device identity is effectively physical, meaning if the device is on the wire, it is treated as part of the system. That can be safe when physical access is truly controlled, but it becomes fragile when more people, more vendors, and more remote connectivity enter the picture. Another misunderstanding is thinking that the primary threat is a remote hacker on the internet, when in serial environments the more realistic pathways often involve insiders, contractors, mismanaged portables, or accidental cross-connections during maintenance. Beginners also sometimes assume that read-only monitoring is always safe, but even read traffic can reveal sensitive information about process behavior and can support later attacks if access is not controlled. There is also the misconception that older protocols cannot be secured at all, which is not true, because security is not only encryption. Security is also segmentation, physical controls, procedures, accountability, and careful handling of changes. When you correct these misunderstandings, you stop treating serial protocol security as hopeless and start treating it as a discipline that must match the environment's constraints. That is exactly the mindset the certification is trying to develop. If you want a simple mental checklist for serial protocol security that stays useful without becoming tool-specific, think in terms of access, intent, and impact. Access is about who can physically reach the cable, the ports, and the devices, and whether that access is controlled and auditable. Intent is about whether the system can distinguish normal operations from unusual commands, unusual devices, or unusual patterns, even if the protocol itself does not authenticate strongly. Impact is about what a message can cause, especially right actions that change states, and whether the system has safeguards like interlocks, limits, and supervisory approval that prevent dangerous actions from being executed casually. For Modbus RTU, this often means treating write capability as a high-risk function and controlling who can originate it. For Profibus and Data Highway Plus, it means protecting the physical network and managing device changes carefully because the process relies on stable communication. For DNP3, it often means extra care around remote command authority and verifying that telemetry reflects reality. This checklist helps you reason through exam scenarios because it keeps you focused on the real question: how does this environment prevent unauthorized influence while preserving safe operation? The best answers usually balance security improvement with operational feasibility. To close, securing serial protocol reality is about accepting the world as it is, not as we wish it were, and then applying disciplined controls that respect both safety and operational constraints. Modbus Remote Terminal Unit, RTU, is widely used and simple, which makes its trust assumptions important to recognize, especially around high-impact write actions. Profibus supports industrial automation needs where timing and reliability matter, and its strength in reliability does not automatically translate into resistance against intentional tampering. Data Highway Plus represents legacy industrial networking realities where stability and compatibility are valued, and where the most dangerous moments often arrive during change and integration. Distributed Network Protocol 3, DNP3, commonly supports remote infrastructure contexts where distance and intermittent communications shape both risk and response. Across all of them, limited built-in security features mean compensating controls like physical protection, controlled gateways, disciplined change management, careful monitoring of behavior, and clear responsibility boundaries become central. When you can recognize these protocols, understand their trust models, and reason about practical security steps without breaking operations, you are building exactly the kind of judgment security OT Plus is designed to test.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.